the best for last. So networking, hybrid networking, and cloud security and compliance. Those are the two best parts of the afternoon. So, all right, so without further ado, again, let's talk a little bit more about cloud security. This is something we talk about extensively with customers. I have this conversation all the time with customers. Biggest question we have here is how much do customers want to own when it comes to security? The customers are used to being able to use a lot of inherent tools within their environment. They have a lot of security controls. We've got compliance, we've got regulatory, we've got audits, we've got all of these things that customers really wrangle with here. The problem that we see across many customers is that security tends to be really, really complicated when it comes to things such as being able to audit against security. Well, let's see if we can really try to see if we can kind of unpack some of those topics here. So we talk about being able to elevate the security with the cloud, right? So we talk about being able to leverage native services, having visibility into the environment to see what you currently have, being able to automate certain things in response to security events, right? So how do I start getting into a true type of automation and type of security model where I don't have to be looking at things manually? And then I can incorporate that with a lot of inherent security services with AWS to give me that ease of administration, so that way my security admins or my SecOps team can really focus on some of the bigger things, such as looking at threat detection, threat modeling, threat prevention, things like that, and how you can leverage basically the AWS cloud and a lot of native services to give you that ability to kind of have access to the largest network of security partners and solutions. So before we go into that, let's talk again about security and kind of how we break down the shared responsibility model between what the cloud looks like and what the customer is responsible for. So again, the customer's responsibility when it comes to data is you're responsible for the data that you put in the cloud. So we talk about customer content. And then once you put the data in the cloud, you've got to be able to secure it. So we talk about customers being able to use client-side data encryption, server-side encryption, network traffic protection. Then you've got the platform applications such as identity and access management. How are you going to federate the applications? How are you going to federate users? How are you going to authenticate users? So the customer is responsible for those things. And then also the most importantly is that the hardening of the OS and then being able to patch and automate that through patching the operating system, configuring that network and firewall configuration. And then AWS is responsible for the cloud. So I talk about customers responsible for what they put in the cloud. AWS is responsible for the cloud. And that includes everything from the global infrastructure to the compute, storage, database, and networking components within inside the cloud. And then between this layer right here is that we've got that layer of abstraction. Below that is going to be our hypervisor. And for that, we basically use our own Nitro type. That's our own software that we've developed that basically is our own hypervisor or virtualization layer that allows that true segmentation between the customer and the actual physical appliances itself. And it's quite advanced how we've been able to do that. So that's kind of really what we talk about when we talk about the shared responsibility model of how the customers can protect themselves, is being able to use all of those features and components available to protect their assets and protect their data and protect the integrity of the data when it comes to a user authentication, auditing, and things like that. So let's talk a little bit about the compliance programs. We talk about how we can ensure compliance, and really the AWS compliance program really just helps customers understand the different controls that are in place at AWS, and the benefit to the customer is being able to say, you can still maintain that security and that compliance in the cloud. Because what we're doing is that we're simply tying together that governance focused and again, audit friendly type of service features that allow customers to have the ability to kind of audit against those compliance and then audit standards. So we talk about the customers being able to have the experience of saying, all right, so I want to build an AWS. It simply allows builders to be able to build, such as on traditional programs. So if you're having to comply with ISO, PCI, SOX, HIPAA, FedRAMP, HITRUST, you can still inherit those same type of security controls still operating in the cloud. And our controls and our compliance programs is something that we are continuing to grow every single year. And we'll talk about how you can actually pull a compliance audit report through one of what we call basically our artifact compliance center. So if you wanted to see if in fact if you're compliant, that's where you're going to be able to pull it. So again, we talk about customers being compliant, and then how do we audit against that? This is a great way to do that. So we have two different things here. We've got global, and we also have regional as well. So for customers who are operating specifically in countries like Japan, Korea, Singapore, is that now we actually have extended that compliance program to be more regional to comply with those specific type of regulatory entities within those specific regions. And I won't spend a great deal of time here on this here, but again, for those customers who are operating in those regions, to have the ability to have that local compliance is a huge factor. Now that I'm operating in the cloud, how do I get that information? So the Artifact and Compliance Center is simply a way for customers, it's their central go-to place for a central repository. And really what it provides is it really provides that information back to you. So that way, if let's just say, for example, you wanted to provide specific documentation. So it really just provides that on-demand access to the security and compliance reports based upon a specific compliance program and those specific online agreements. So reports are available for things such as a SOC, so if you're having to comply with service organizational controls, PCI reports, and any other type of certification accreditation body across geographic regions or across different compliance verticals. This is really where you want to provide it. And simply, customers can go through there and be able to pull that report, and it's really available. Those agreements are available, and the Artifact include that the BAA and the NDA as well. So that's where you can go in. You can go in and basically pull that from the Artifact repository within the console itself. So let's talk about security in the cloud. Really when it gets into the customer really has multiple layers of ways that they can go about security in the cloud. We talk about visibility, we talk about governance, threat intelligence, all of those things that customers can still be able to build upon that they have been doing on-prem for a long period of time. They can still be able to do those things in the cloud. The thing about that is the fact is that it gives them flexibility, it gives them features that they can build on. And now we can start to say, all right, so I want to be able to provide encryption, network and network encapsulation, endpoint security, threat detection, forensics. You can still be able to build upon that. And that's the great thing, is that you still can build upon those security pillars, such as identifying what assets you currently have, right? So what do I have and how do I protect it, right? How do I detect something such as an assumed breach? Is this a false positive? What is my response to that? And then how do I respond and ultimately recover from anything such as a known potential threat or any type of, maybe let's just say, vulnerability out there. Let's say, for example, we've got ports open to an EC2 instance, or let's say that potentially could lead to data exposure or possibly even to a database. How do I make sure that we can act swiftly if those things? Well, we can now start to use more native services that build in the ability for us to be able to automate the response to those type of actions without us having to really worry about basically having to be hands-on keyboards. So let's kind of walk through a little bit more about what services are available when we start getting into more of a cloud native approach. And again, there's a lot of services out there. So if we still take that same model of being able to identify what data we have out there, we have a tool called basically AWS Config. And really, AWS provides a lot of these native tools that simply allow customers to, the goal here is to automate manual security tasks that really allow you to shift that focus to basically scaling and innovating specifically things such as your business needs or even a maybe new go-to-market strategy. Another great feature about this is that you only pay for the services that you use. So you don't have to use all the services here. But if you were adopting a few of these services, or we have some customers that are using a few of these components here, the benefit here is that you only pay for what you use. And really all customers, whether you're implementing something, whether you're just beginning your cloud journey or very mature into your cloud journey, all customers really benefit from the cloud being able to have all of these services available, not just specifically a list of service offerings associated with supply chain most customers are used to, but it allows them to be able to still be able to maintain that top level of security when it comes to protecting their workloads. So again, is that the options available to us here are really, really endless here. I'll talk about two things here. We talk about a couple things such as being able to protect and detect here. Again, I can spend all day on this, and I had done a previous talk at Angel Beat where I went into some of these services in depth. But I'll take apart and we'll just specifically look at one service here with inside. And let's talk about Guard Duty. Guard Duty is a service that a lot of our customers are starting to implement more and more of. And the reason why is that it really starts to build in a lot of AI ML capabilities So let's say, for example, if that we've got identification through config. Configs allows us to see kind of a timeline recorder of kind of what's happening. Then we can start protecting our data, such as being able to use Shield or Firewall Manager, and then being able to detect. And then really where we start getting into the automate and respond is being able to use CloudWatch and CloudTrail logs. And then if in fact we need to recover, we've got our snapshots, and even in fact we got our archive. But let's talk a little bit more about GuardDuty. And really GuardDuty is that threat detection service that really continuously monitors, and really what it's looking for is it's looking for malicious activity and unauthorized behavior, specifically within inside your environment. So whether it's across accounts, workloads, or if in fact if it's looking at data within AWS S3. So let's say you've got data stored within S3. We're talking about being able to collect a large amount of data. So we're aggregating all this data from different accounts, and then we're looking at all the network activity. And then ultimately what we want to do is we want to simplify it, because it's really, really time consuming for security teams to continuously analyze event logs and data for potential threats. You've really got to have a vast team of people looking at data continuously. So what we want to do is take those and be able to kind of start shifting the focus to be able to simplify that, automate it, so that way we now have a true, intelligent, and very most importantly, a very cost-effective option for continuous threat detection with inside AWS. So let's take a look at some of the data sources here. So I've got stuff coming in from VPC flow logs. So that's all the accept reject traffic that's coming in from that traffic that's coming in through my VPC. And then now let's just say, for example, I've got DNS logs, right? So all of those DNS requests that are coming in, I want to feed that in as well. And CloudTrail, I want to be able to say, all right, so all the resource, everything that's happening within my resources, I want to feed that through to GuardDuty, and then I want to then be able to look at specific types of threat detection. And really that cost effectiveness, or basically that that cost effectiveness of it is really cool. Really the service underneath, it's using machine learning with anomaly detection, and then it's also integrating specific integrated threat intelligence into it, too. That way it can identify, and then most importantly, it can prioritize potential type of threats. So GuardDuty really is going to be able to, let's just say now we're talking about operating at scale. We're now talking about leveraging GuardDuty to analyze tens of billions of events across multiple AWS data sources. So if we're looking at CloudTrail events, VPC flow logs, DNS logs, we're talking about millions and billions of events across different data streams that you're now going to have to be able to sort through. With GuardDuty, you can funnel all that in, and with inside the management console, you can enable GuardDuty, and now it can start looking at that type of behavior, and then it starts to give you a report based upon high, medium, and low findings. So if I were to say, all right, so I want to be able to look at all the different types of high events, low and medium events, I now can have a single pane of glass that I can now go to look at that type of information. And the great thing about this is that over time, it's going to learn your behavior. So it's going to see basically what's a pattern, what's an anti-pattern, and what's malicious activity. So we see Bitcoin mining, or we basically certain types of examples such as anomaly detection. So launching specific instances or changing network permissions, or unusual ports and volumes basically being created. So GuardDuty is looking at all those things. And then ultimately what I could feed that into is I could feed that into the Security Hub, which is another native service that allows me more visibility within the data to say, now that this has been found, how do you want to remediate this? So I can build in security with automation, so that way I can actually respond to those security events that is actually remediating that based upon AI, ML, and of course some automation built into it. I can drop that into an S3 bucket and then feed that into a SIEM type of system, where I can even say I want to be able to feed that into another partner solution. You can do that as well. Or you can even populate that out through CloudWatch, where you can even, again, part that out to a different SIEM, different partner solutions, whichever. So again, we're allowing you the flexibility to be able to take that data and then be able to use it however you see fit based upon your organizational needs. Another part about security we're talking about, and one thing that we hear more and more from customers is security governance. And this is something we talk about. So as customers continue their cloud journey, the question is how do we incorporate, adopt, and implement a governance strategy when it comes to security? So when customers first move to the cloud, they first think that they have to basically build out, they need to build out a cloud security governance model based upon regulatory frameworks and things like that that are relevant specifically to their industry. And although that is a very helpful first step, but also it's just critically important that really what customers understand is that they need to understand that what the control objectives are for their workloads and what they should be. So before you go out and just build that model, it's really just important to take a step back and really kind of understand what governance is and really why you should consider it and why you ultimately need it. And the way I break it down for customers is, governance is really about how an organization just ensures that their consistent application and policies are simply the same across all teams. I worked in large-scale organizations for many years, and the problem is that you had different application teams, different lines of business that all had different types of application models. They had different types of controls in place. There was really no governance. Everyone was just kind of, hey, if it works for me, great. If it works for another team, great. But really, when we start getting into cloud, the best way to implement a consistent governance strategy is simply by coding as much of the process as possible. So we start getting into infrastructure as code. This feeds into a DevOps model. And of course, we start talking about as many hands off the keyboard as possible. And then we start talking about how do you scale? This also becomes another problem as well. Security governance really is there to support business objectives and just simply to define those controls and how do you manage risk. And that's the great way about being able to leverage cloud, is that now you can start to simplify that. So when we talk about governance at scale, what are some things that we can implement within AWS that gives us as an organization the ability to scale governance? Well, we talk to our customers across a wide range of industries, a wide range of industry verticals. And one thing that consistently comes up is how do they understand their role within a specific security team? And then how do they work across a distributed cloud-aware environment or a cloud center of excellence team? And ultimately that answer is always the same. Basically security people are there to help the business deployed applications run securely, and that's it. And really our job is to really guide and educate those customers and the rest of the organization on the best way to meet those objectives while they're trying to balance things like security, while they're trying to balance things like risk, and ultimately how do they meet those compliance requirements. So really, in the cloud environment, it really goes a long way. And then we talk about this as basically kind of a two ways you can do this. First, it's providing guardrails and automated guidance for people building on the platform. And second, it allows a solution to scale. And that's really what we're talking about. And this is where organizations face the challenges. How do I balance being able to build those platforms? And then how do those solutions scale? So really, we talk about being able to talk about governance scale. So we talk about this as a way to enable customers. So for example, we talk about identity as a foundation control within inside the cloud environment. So we talk about being able to access the data based upon permissions and policies. So that's one of the inherent controls. So we start talking about things such as access, identity management, things like that. One of our well-architected security best practices is rely on a centralized identity provider. So you could choose something such as single sign-on. You can choose this to be able to choose it to be federated. So you can choose from coming from on-prem. You could choose from SAML. A wide variety of single sign-on providers allow you to get access to the data and access to resources within the environment. So if you centralize your identity provider, you can simply perform your identity lifecycle management on things like users, provide them with access only to those resources that they're simply required to access, and support them when users move between different teams, right? So you've got people who are moving across your organization in different roles. It's very painstaking to basically have to change user permissions all the time when they move groups or move different teams. Let's just basically make sure that we can simplify that process as users move throughout organizations, because not everybody stays in the same role in the same organization forever. So that's going to happen, and we have to account for that. And really what we could do is we can apply this across multiple accounts using something called organizations. And that simply leverages what we call an SCP or a service control policy. And that service control policy allows us, or as an organization, allows you to create a subset of services or permissions to those services in particular environments. This way, the best way you can do this is to provide identity-centric guardrails around those resources within inside your organization. So when we talk about being able to provision, we talk about this concept of an account factory. So a control tower is another great way of being able to leverage this feature of being able to use automated provisioning. And ultimately what it does is it provides ultimately 3 methods for how we create member accounts. And it's through the account factory that allows you to be part of what we call our service catalog. So again, is that we're able to, let's just say, author a bunch of applications, and then really through that is that from Control Tower, we can then tie that into a management account that's using things like Lambda, IAM, and that way it provides us with a way that we can provide console-based products as part of the service catalog. So let's say, for example, we've got a user or business user that wants to provision an application stack, or they want to launch a database. Let's say that we want to provide them with a way that's already governed and prepared set of services. Service Catalog is great for that because it allows users to have a self-service portal that allows them to go in and provision these types of products and services inside the organizations. Now, from the DevOps perspective, is that the DevOps team, the developers, what they're doing is they're simply coding the infrastructure as code and packaging all of those in as a centralized framework for them to deploy those resources. So from the end user's perspective is that they now can go into a self-service portal and pick from a list of products that your entity or your organization has already created. So that way we get into a true account or basically true product type of basically kind of like a vending machine. That way you can basically provision your applications, the users have access to them. When you're done, you can simply then go in and delete the application. And that way the developers don't have to be involved in the, I got to deploy an application for X user or for X business entity. This is a great way for you to have segmentation, governance within a set of pre-approved IT services that people can already pre-pick from. Very cool. And another one, basically, we talk about things within our DevOps model, such as CloudFormation. So if you're not familiar with CloudFormation, it simply allows you to leverage infrastructure as code. So that way you can build those type of highly available and scalable types of environments using infrastructure as code without having to worry about creating any of the underlying type of infrastructure. So it just simply allows you to use a template, whether it's JSON or YAML. You can use that to basically create a series of resources. You can launch them, you can create them, and then as you're deleting the stack, it all gets deleted at the same time. Service Catalog, I mentioned this before. It really just enables IT administrators to create, manage, and distribute a portfolio of approved products so those end users can really access those products through a personalized portal inside your organization. So we talk about being able to provision products without having to involve the admins or the DevOps or basically the architects. This is a great way for you to do it. So from an end user perspective, it simplifies the ability to get applications up and running as quickly as possible. They have ownership over those applications, and then they can terminate those stacks as well. So again, we talk about this whole concept of being able to kind of have full visibility with agility and control, which is hard for most organizations to balance here. So we want to be able to monitor those resources, audit against them, optimize. So how do we provide and analyze and reduce costs to ensure efficiency? And then ultimately, how do we take action on specific resources? So we talk about this whole concept about agility and control. So what does that look like in the cloud from an AWS perspective? Well, we talk about being able to use something where we can monitor resources. So CloudWatch. And CloudWatch is one of our services that allows you to really be able to monitor and look at your solutions that are being deployed, and then you can start using that within minutes. You don't need to set up and manage or basically scale your own monitoring systems or infrastructure. All of that's now built into together. Config is another very powerful tool that a lot of customers are using. Again, this simply provides you with a detailed view of how you can look at resources associated within your account. So let's say, for example, people are launching EC2 instances. They're basically launching EC2 instances with EBS volumes, creating network, VPC, all of those things that they're configured. How do you audit against that? You can use config to look to see how those resources are configured and then how they're related to one another. So again, we start talking about configuration drift. Another cool thing within config is that it gives you the ability to kind of have what they call a timeline recorder. And the timeline recorder allows you to see who changed what resource, what action did they take, when it was changed, and then what the drift is. And that's another cool feature within that as well. And then in a second, we'll talk about config rules, which I think is a really powerful thing that a lot of customers are using today. So a lot of customers, they tend to kind of have this current approach to security assessments. They get this Excel spreadsheet, they start passing this around to different teams, we start taking a list of applications and things like that, And this is the way that we did things many years ago. And unfortunately, many organizations are still doing this. I saw this just not too long ago. This is a very old way. Even though this is an old way of doing things, this becomes very inefficient because we're doing a lot of things manually. So we're trying to apply a very archaic, or even if it's let's just say a manual approach to security assessments. We want to see if we can try to automate more of those things and get into more of a real-time protection, real-time visibility, and real-time automation. And how do we do that, right? So we talk about this thing about continuous compliance within AWS. Again, being able to leverage those things, and we'll talk about this. So who made what change? Where did it come from? And we can do that in real time to really detect things such as misconfigurations and, most importantly, non-compliance. So non-compliance is a great way for us to say, what happens if, in fact, if somebody takes an S3 bucket and makes it public? How do I know that somebody made that change? A great way for us to do that is use what we call a config rule. And the config rule allows us to see what resources are not compliant based upon that rule policy. And that allows us to really prevent those risks from materializing. So what does it look like? Well, when we get into config, we start to config what we use config rules. And then we start to see what things are compliant and what are not compliant. So let's say, for example, I basically want a rule set here. So for example, when EC2 is created, so let's just say when a volume is created, config can evaluate the volume against a rule that basically looks at a rule policy that requires volumes to be encrypted. So if that volume is not encrypted, config is going to flag that volume as non-compliant. And then config can also check all of those other resources across the account. So it can look at all those resources across the account, and now it gives me true real-time visibility as to basically what's not compliant. So that could be EC2 resources, that could be RDS that's not encrypted, that could be S3 buckets that are public. Really what it is a config rule. It simply evaluates the configuration settings of those particular resources. And then you do this by simply creating the AWS Config Rules, which represent an ideal configuration setting for you. And these are customizable, and these are predefined rules that can be managed to help you really get started. There's going to be about 100+ different types of rules built into config that allows you to get in and get started. So again, a great way for that is to just start seeing what's compliant, not compliant. And then the way we can automate that is that we can automatically send an email to the security team when a control fails in real time. So let's say config is going to run periodically throughout the day. Let's say, for example, we now start to see here one of the rule names is we have unencrypted volumes. We have someone creating EC2 instances with unencrypted volumes. I have 6 non-compliant resources. I'm going to fire an email off to the security team and let them know when resources fall out of compliance. And this is now where we start to get into real-time analysis. Another great thing about config is being able to look at the timeline. And this is what I talked about, the timeline recorder, is that now config supports what we talk about storing a compliant state change for those resources. So if I look at this, I can start to see the resource when it was created. So I see that it was created on certain so-and-so date. And then I start to see the compliance history represented in the form of a timeline. And that timeline simply captures the configuration of that item over time for a specific resource. And really that resource timeline is available in config, and then it allows you to see kind of what changed, who changed it, when it was changed, and then basically the drift as to what is different from when it was first deployed. So we start talking about being able to have more hands off the keyboards. And then now we start talking about saying we're going to deploy everything as resource, everything as infrastructure as code. Now we start to see the drift of what was configured and then what was changed. Now this starts feeding into things such as auditing and my change control process. We could also start building in within config a way to remediate certain findings, right? So let's say, for example, whenever we do find a non-compliant resource, right? So it's evaluated against AWS Config Rules. And then Config Rules is going to use what we call a remediation action that is going to basically leverage Systems Manager, that is going to basically say, all right, so we've found something that's non-compliant. What are you going to do about it? Well, I'm going to basically run an automatic remediation on this that says, by using this remediation rule, I can then start to do something. So my remediation could be detach EBS volumes, it could be deleted, it could be enable, it could be a number of series of actions. But now we start getting into automatic remediation of resources when they fall out of compliance. Really cool stuff. So again, security is a big topic. I could talk about this all day, but what are my next steps? If I'm an organization that's already running an AWS, how do I get to the point where I can start talking about some of these things, what will help me as an organization when it comes to security, automation, remediation, all of those things? We talk about this extensively through our well-architected framework. And this really is a way for organizations to leverage the well-architected framework, which is built inside the tool to be able to go against and measure against the 5 different pillars across things such as operational excellence, security, reliability, performance, that allows you to see exactly what is running right in your environment and what are some best practices that can be applied that better enhances your security posture. A couple things that the well-architected framework will look at will be things such as it'll ask you, how do you manage your credentials? Do you control human access? How do you detect and investigate security issues? How do you classify data? How do you protect data at rest, in transit? How do you respond to an incident? So these are all questions that the well-architected framework is going to ask you that you will answer. And as it goes through these questions, it's going to ask you these questions, and it's going to then say, all right, so based upon this, we start to see here now you'll see a snippet here of basically how do you protect the data, and then it will give you a drop-down series of options. So it's going to walk you through this process of filling out this information in the console. And then at the very end of that, it's going to show you, all right, so based upon the assessment of the data that you have provided through the well-architected framework tool, here are some things that AWS sees as high risk. So out of all the questions that asked you, there's one high risk item, there's medium risk, and of course, there's one that no improvements identified. There's always areas to improve upon. I can tell you is that it's very common for customers to go through this and see areas of improvement when it comes to security, is that you could always be better. And then it'll tell you basically how many questions you did answer, how many you did not answer. So based upon this information, you can have this conversation with your solutions architect or your architect and talk about how we can improve your security posture based upon the readout from your well-architected framework assessment. I can't talk enough about training. Again, when we talk about how do I get more hands-on with this, we talk about the AWS security specialty certification. This is where we can talk about having more of a deep dive where you can get hands-on with this. Again, is that there's an extensive library out there. We talk about people getting certified that allows them to get a little bit more hands-on with security. There's 30 free hours of basically digital content out there, deep dives on guard duty, container security. Again, there's a lot of things out there. And a great way for you to validate that experience is to get your AWS security certification specialty exam. Again, we talk about being able to access training. We talk about training for individuals. We talk about training for the entire organization. Again, there's tons of free content out there. There's deep dives, there's classroom training. There's a lot of things out there on YouTube that we've published. There's also labs out there as well. So again, a great way for you to demonstrate that is to get industry recognized certification or basically talk with your solutions architect or anyone at AWS about how do you get training. I'll end with 2 links here about security. Again, this is something I could talk about all day, but and just to respect everyone's time, I know it's getting near the end of the day. If you want more information about security, go to these 2 links here. If you want more information about training, about how you get certified, I highly encourage you to do so. This is the best way for you to get hands-on and prove your proficiency to your organization.